What up, Coordination? On the pod today, we have Brandon Nørgaard, who is a writer, researcher, and community organizer. He is also the co-founder of the Enlightened Worldview Project, which is a project that is aimed at improved coordination and understanding, helping us resolve the problems in our world, mending divisions, improving communication, reducing conflict, connecting thought to action, increasing personal growth, and inspiring civic engagement are the objectives of the Enlightened Worldview Project. And so in this episode, we talk about the Enlightened Worldview Project, but also a talk that Brandon gave at Stoa in 2022, the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis. So in a way, this is a continuation of our series on the Meta Crisis. And I wanted to have him on the podcast to share his ideas on that subject and to also talk about his Gitcoin grant, which is a Gitcoin grant for a course that he's putting together called The Meta Crisis, What It Is and What You Can Do About It. So it starts with framing the meta crisis, some common but simplistic responses to the meta crisis is part 2, and then dives into game theory, complexity thinking, integrative and meta-modern approaches to addressing the meta crisis from there, and then starts to think about solutioning from there. So if you haven't listened to our previous episodes on the meta crisis, you want to look back and look for the episodes with Stephen Reed and Daniel Schmachtenberger. Those are supporting episodes to this episode, which is in some ways about the meta crisis, but also about Brandon's work and thinking and using integral theory in order to understand some of this stuff. So really enjoyed this conversation with Brandon, and I think that you are too. So without further ado, Coordination, I give you Brandon Nørgaard. Enjoy.
HAIRDAO is here to route around the middlemen in biomedical research for hair loss. HAIRDAO is an open source investment and operating organization using the coordination tools of Ethereum to begin exploring the frontier of biomedical research that bureaucracy and middlemen have previously prevented. Did you know that 66% of men and 50% of women will experience hair loss in their lifetimes? HAIRDAO has already done some crazy cool science stuff, like their first research study on the impact of synthetic T3 and T4 thyroid hormones on the human scalp, and is also the second DAO ever to mint an IP NFT. So if you want to explore the frontier of the decentralized science movement, and maybe also you've lost your hair along the way, check out HAIRDAO at hairdao.xyz.
Hey, Brandon, how's it going?
Yeah, good. How are you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. Excited to talk about the Enlightened Worldview Project. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. Well, we say it's a quest to promote peace through societal understanding and inner awareness. We are aiming to promote ideas that in ways of community organizing that can bring a lot of these ideas to people at the community level so that they can leverage it to improve their life, their family, their community. A lot of what we're doing involves networks of in-person community meetings focused around things like sense making, inner awareness, meaning making, and civic engagement, and the relation between these. And we're also looking at how we can have software development to coordinate this, build on top of Web3 platforms to do this, and also have community leadership to facilitate these events and share data and stuff like that. So we also, a lot of it involves, courses. We're going to do online courses to train people, to train community leaders to be able to facilitate these events and to bring a lot of these next generation concepts of, the liminal web and sense making to people in a way that connects, in a way that is inspiring and engaging, to young citizens for, be able to sort out fact from fiction in the news, and to be entertained while they do it, to be able to come together in the community and face to face, rather than just being on the screen all the time. But those communities, those in-person communities and circles will be interwoven with the online communities.
Yeah. I think that it's just so interesting to me. Your stated goal, I'm on enlightenedworldview.com, which listeners can pull it up and check out the website as well. But just the idea of studying this dysfunction in public discourse and recommending new ways of dialogue in our overly polarized world with culture wars and everything like that. Feels like people who are trying to build cooperation across social distance are really creating a public good. And that's what stuck out to me about the Enlightened Worldview Project is actually naming that as a goal and actually trying to turn it around. So what inspired you to start the Enlightened Worldview Project?
Well, yeah, I've always been kind of interested in a lot of these things. Growing up here in Northern California, we have technology advancing year after year, getting more and more advanced and complex, and so it just seems like people can come together and not have these ideas and just actually do things. And then also actually growing up more specifically in the Sacramento area, the seat of government for California, I'm interested in government. I'm interested in how we can build communities and improve people's lives, I'm interested in politics. I'm interested seeing that the degradation of politics and the further breakdown in our socio-cultural framework. And I'm thinking, okay, why is it that the technology keeps getting better and better, whereas the political, economic, and socio-cultural framework seems to be fraying more and more? These institutions seem to be decaying. Okay, so actually, I'll admit that our economic system seem to be charging forward every year, but not a lot of people are getting left behind. So what is that? What's going on? And why can't we use our bring our minds together and actually address some of these challenges like we can for technology? So there is that juxtaposition there between Silicon Valley and Sacramento. That was something I was faced with growing up, and I was interested in how to deal with this. So I wanted to figure out, is there anything we could do? And, with some of these meetup events I started getting involved with and started organizing a lot of them, and people coming together and talking, just about every Saturday morning at these coffee shops and, pubs and stuff. And we're talking about ideas, and we realized we could actually do something about this. We can try to find a way to improve community organizing and improve government and other stuff like that. And probably actually one of the main things is that we were looking at some of these brilliant minds who are coming out with these podcasts, and we're like, okay, this is a lot of the answers are in here, but it's not really connecting with people. There's a whole sophistication spectrum, and we need to be able to kind of have a multi-level translation effort to bring these ideas from guys like Daniel Schmachtenberger and Jordan Hall to a broader audience, and in a way that connects. So that was one of the main things we were aiming to do with this. And we were also seeing that people are on our screens. We're just on our screens too much. And the technology is addicting us to their content, with films such as The Social Dilemma. And we're like, okay, thinking what we're doing here with these meetup events is a part of the solution that not a lot of people seem to be talking about, So there's an explosion of online communities, and people are talking to each other a lot more through Zoom calls or other social networks, especially through the pandemic. But why can't we have more coffee shop discussions, have a revival of that, to really focus on these areas like, sense making, inner awareness, community development, civic engagement, etc.
Yeah. You used the phrase liminal web earlier, and it kind of stuck out to me. That's a phrase I've heard a bunch when listening to Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger, and I Googled it, and I guess liminal means of a transitionary state. So how would you describe the liminal web space?
Oh, yeah. It comes from coined by Joe Lightfoot, a friend of mine, and he actually mentioned the Enlightened Worldview Project in that long article that he introduced the concept. And so it's like we are in a transition phase because a lot of our institutions and our cultural frameworks are starting to break down. A lot of people are getting left behind. There's an enormous gap between the very wealthy and the people who are just struggling to get by, and it's not sustainable. And then so there's different possible ways in which things could unfold, but it's not going to stay the way it is now. So there is that transition phase. So that's the idea of the liminal, is that moving between different relatively stable states, so what's happening. That's what we feel like we're in that right now.
Yeah. Got it. So I would love to, I want to come back to the Enlightened Worldview Project and what you're doing, but maybe we could dip into this talk that you gave at the Stoa about the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis. We've been doing a lot of Meta Crisis related content on GreenPilled, so I think that the audience would benefit a lot from knowing what kind of ideas you shared on that talk. So could you take us down that rabbit hole?
Yes, I could. And so first of all, to kind of define the meta crisis for your audience who maybe isn't fully aware of this yet, we're talking about the sum total of all of the major crises that humanity is facing. So there are several independent and interrelated crises that we're facing simultaneously that collectively pose an existential threat to human civilization. And the central idea is that our biosphere is facing an ecological emergency, and that we have a serious failings in other areas of public life that are preventing us from adequately addressing this emergency. Most notably, our political, sociocultural, economic, and educational systems that seem to be showing very serious failures. And thus, we can consider each of these to be a distinct crisis in its own right. And these crises are exacerbated by a breakdown in public sense making and by distortions within the information ecology. And at the core of this is probably what we would call the meaning crisis, which is that leads many people to confusion and alienation and the inability to find sufficient intelligibility and purpose within their lives. So what I was trying to figure out was, I'm watching a lot of these, listening to a lot of these podcasts, and I'm seeing a lot of people. There's a lot of agreement that we are facing multiple simultaneous crises, and they're interrelated and interconnected, and that people have different approaches or different ways of saying this crisis is the main one or the primary one, or this is. Other people are saying, this is the main thing that we need to do. This is what we need to focus on primarily. So I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to compare and contrast this, and I ended up making some tables and some diagrams, and I ended up I was on the Stoa to talk about that. I guess we're going to be talking about that in more detail here as well.
Yeah, I've got this image in front of me from your talk from the Stoa, the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis, and it's got all these different arrows between like Game B and meta sense making and Enlightenment 2.0 and solar punk. I would identify myself as a solar punk, and just knowing how these ideas relate to each other. And there's other Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis. Actually, Web3 is on this is on here too. And I thought it feels a little bit less lonely to know that there's other tribes that care about this. And it sort of begs the question, what can we all learn from each other? So, yeah, I don't know if you have any responses to that, but that's the question at the tip of my tongue is like, what can we all learn from each other in these different tribes?
Yeah, exactly. And, there's ways in which we can analyze this on the basis of like, what is the central cause? What is the central focus? And what is the central approach? And then you can see different adjacencies. And even if you recognize, well, there's multiple causes, there's multiple approaches, but there's some that you want to probably see are central. For a lot of people, there's, bioregeneration and sustainable living is central. But there's like an intellectual history and cultural history for these different communities, and maybe they're not aware of each other. So you're seeing solar punk showing up on the screen on this diagram here that has a connection, to different other prior communities. I mean, there's a certain connection to certain versions of like anarchism, or individual sustainable self-sufficiency, and there's also a connection to Game B, which is that, using game theory to recognize that we can have better institutions, more sustainable institutions, where we're not so pitted against each other to have, some winners and some losers at the game of life. We want to make new rules of the economic and political systems wherein more people win at the game of life, So and then there's also connections with that solar punk has to, you would think, to the localization and bioregionalism and the so-called doom or optimism community. Although that emerged out of a different kind of intellectual history, So definitely there's connections that people can make to each other by recognizing not only their intellectual lineage, but also what are they talking about? A lot of times people talk about similar ideas, but with different language. So you can find that adjacency, and team up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, a lot of these worldviews kind of are forked from each other. I think you mentioned the relationship between Game B and solarpunk and anarchism, and I think just understanding that in a network world, the bubbles of thought are going to evolve and sort of fork from each other and join together in a way faster way, and just and seeing that evolution up on screen is really useful. So I found the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis, your talk at the Stoa, to be really profound, and we'll link it in the show notes so that people can check it out if they want. But it felt like you were doing a public good for the space. Is like, everyone who cares about the meta crisis, you're in one tribe. Here are the 4 adjacent tribes that you can go work with, and I think that that's a public good for the space. So yeah, anything else you want to say about the talk or the ideas in the talk?
Yeah, definitely. So I was trying to break it down by, first of all, by different like worldview, for different value memes, wherein some of these are a little bit more kind of simplistic in how they break things down and how they address, how they come up with interventions. And so this gets into what Roger Walsh was talking about with the so-called single focus fallacy. Because if we're talking about something as complex and multifaceted as the meta crisis, these are the greatest challenges of our time. And it's not just one thing. So he wants to warn against what he calls the single issue fallacy, which is the idea that there is a single important issue that we need to focus on in our most important and most grave crisis. Like we just need to hammer that point as much as possible. Yeah. Well, like for example, people who say it's just global warming or just overpopulation.
Yeah, climate change is the big one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is obviously important, but it's like you need to recognize how that connects to other things, like with the breakdown in governments, how we have dysfunctional government. And a lot of times, a lot of that comes down to, well, we haven't updated our Constitution for a long, long time. Some people seem to think it was written in stone or came down from Mount Sinai or something like that. So also the Roger Walsh wants to warn us against the so-called single cause fallacy, which is the idea that our major problems stem from a single cause. For example, it's all caused by capitalism or greed. And those are certainly causes, but there's other causes, and he also finally wants to warn us against the single solution fallacy, which is the idea that all of the major challenges of our time can be addressed by a single type of intervention. For example, we just need a better balance between left hemisphere and right hemisphere thinking, which is actually what Ian McGill-Chris seems to be saying. Okay, so, well, that's important, I guess. We do want balanced thinking. Or maybe we just need to consume less. We need to pollute less. Okay, so those are single solution fallacies. And I think what Roger Walsh is wanting to say, and other people who have analyzed the multi-complex meta crisis, is that we could probably narrow it down to a manageable handful of classes of interventions and analysis. But if we try to say it's just one thing, that's oversimplifying things. So this is in fact what I was really trying to do here with this graphic, is to say among the solutions that are not narrowing things down in terms of the single cause, we can identify. I have identified 6 of these ideational approaches from which the more specific approaches seem to derive, and a lot of them derive from more than one of these. But they're like, okay, what is the most central focus in terms of how things come together and what we can do about it? So for game B, it's like, okay, game theory. We need to look at the rules of the game of our economic and political systems, and then there's another one for what I would call meta sense making, which is that we need better sense making or better education. Better ways in which we are sorting out fact from fiction in the news, gathering information, recognizing what is scientific versus what is not. Another one is Enlightenment 2.0, and that's actually very central to what I do, which is the idea. I define enlightenment, and especially Enlightenment 2.0, as a convergence of the Eastern rational enlightenment and the Western spiritual enlightenment. So the idea is that the essence of enlightenment is that peace and tranquility come from an understanding, come from understanding, rationality, compassion, and this relation, of harmony within yourself and within your community simultaneously. So those are all important there. So I'm also recognizing there's this, there's other primary ideational. There's one that comes from the work of Nora Bateson and her father, Gregory, which is this warm data approach of recognizing context in everything and different contexts and trans-contextual thinking. There's also so-called Folkbildung, which is, and that's a really important one for me as well. So this comes from the work of Lena Rachel Anderson, and she's identified, in fact, we're on the third version of Folkbildung. So she's done a lot of historiographical research on where this comes from. So Bildung is community development, self-cultivation, and lifelong learning, all working hand in hand. So bringing things to the community level, local people working together with community leaders to actually develop themselves culturally and in terms of education. So that is I'm seeing a primary ideational approach, and also we have the Dark Renaissance here, which is favored by people like Alexander Bard, and that is this idea that there are these urges that we have that we're not going to get away from. There's violence and sex are going to be involved, and just we don't want to fight against it, we want to work with it. And this idea that we're going to save the world through these interventions is kind of foolish. Maybe things will go dark in the coming years, but from this will be an emergence of different kind of way of life. So I hope I'm not misrepresenting that, but I'm looking at these primary ideational approaches and how they're related to each other and how the more specific ideas come, and a lot of these I identified from books or from podcasts or organizations that are out there. There's some ones that I really like a lot, including the Hansi Freinack books, the so-called Listening Society and Nordic Ideology. That is my own project, drives quite a bit from that.
Yeah. And I gotta say, listening to you talk through all these things, I think is really quite interesting. And the thing that I have on my screen right here is the map of the tribes of the meta crisis. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So would just encourage the listener to click into the show notes, and the cover image of your YouTube talk is this graph. So it really helps you traverse all of the different memetic tribes, having the visual in front of you. What I heard there that I thought was quite profound was that each of these memetic tribes have their sort of one commandment or one meme or set of ideas that they all swirl around. And then there's 24 on my screen right now. And I think that what I'm hearing from you is that there's no one solution or one way of framing the problem. It's in the plurality of understanding all of the different ways together that you sort of grasp the whole elephant of these trends in the meta crisis. Is that too reductionist, or is that a fair take on what you said?
I think that's about right, but I also wanted to emphasize that some of these might actually be more effective than others. And there, I would imagine really truly integrative approach. We're all doing our part in our own way to actually address the greatest challenges of our time, to somehow avoid the most negative outcomes, which might be coming in the next few years, because that's going to probably involve a synthesis of many of these, but in different degrees, I would have to say. And it's okay to have different opinions about that. I mean, my own opinion would probably leverage a lot more Folkbildung and what is explained within the the Hansi Freinacht books, and probably not quite as much on this dark Renaissance side of things. But, I think there's room for a lot of these approaches within an integrative approach.
Yeah. And likewise, I'll just identify my bias. I see Web3 and peer-to-peer on this, and this is a podcast about regenerative crypto, right? So that's the you are here for me on this map. And I think that we relate to each of these things differently, but I would also identify under solar punk and techno optimism and doomer optimism. And I think that being able to hold all these multiple perspectives in my mind paints a richer picture of ways of thinking about this stuff. But it also, I think that when you get into addressing the meta crisis, it's understanding, Daniel has this whole quote about how understanding a problem is halfway to addressing it. And so these are just finding different ways of understanding the problem set. And I think that's why it advances the discussion for me. Yeah.
And I'm also favoring, the Web3 space for how are we going to do anything. I've read a lot of these theory books being like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this and this? And then I'm like, okay, so how are we going to coordinate this at scale? And how are we going to make it so that it's not that there's a central, authority behind so much of this work, which would cause it to unravel? So I am looking at, okay, so how can we coordinate these community circles that are focused on developing people and communities in these ways? And what sort of a thing could we do? Definitely it'd be a Web3 solution. I'm looking at, how to build, holochain apps to help with some of this.
Yeah. And I think that, another example of that is that the Enlightened Worldview Project has a Gitcoin grant now. Yeah. So like leveraging Web3 to fund your research and produce more great stuff like this. So along with the intersection with holochain, the intersection with Web3, hopefully Gitcoin can do some stuff here.
Yeah.
So link to that grant will be in the show notes. And I think that this will go live during the grants round. So quick shill for that Gitcoin grant for everyone.
Yeah. So the grant is to produce a course called The Meta Crisis, What It Is and What You Can Do About It. So that will be an interactive online course to help understand the meta crisis, the different aspects of it, the different approaches. And also, we wanted to allow for people to have their own synthesis idea. Like you could have a class project that would allow people to look at this to come up with their own ideas for how it can work. Maybe people will be already working for, some sort of governmental agency or a nonprofit organization, and they're looking at, okay, what can my organization do? And we're going to bounce ideas off each other within these cohorts. And so you put together a plan, get some feedback from not only the teacher, but also the other students. And so maybe also make networking across different people within the cohort to come up with their own unified synthesis ideas of, what is an actionable plan? So for so much of this, there's a whole capability stack, like we're trying to address big challenges, but we got to start somewhere. We got to actually do something in the adjacent possible. So it is actually, I would think these solutions that, would be a part of the class project would be not only based on like, okay, what's the next 5 steps, but what's the next step in order to try to get there, to try to get some momentum. So that is that's the point of this, to see the big picture, but also to see the microcosm in those adjacent possibles.
Yeah. So it's a course about the meta crisis, what it is and what you can do about it. Would you consider this to be a product of the Enlightened Worldview Project? This course? Yeah,
in fact, that's one. So this is, in fact, I can say that the Enlightened Worldview Project, we've evolved it into something where we're trying to coordinate these community meetings, as I was talking about, but we also want to do these online courses that can help bring those community meetings about, and also to help develop people in these ways. So we have some courses that we are planning, and this one is already at the grant stage, and so we're trying to promote that. I can say that we right now we have an outline for the course. It's on the website. In fact, you can if you go to enlightenedworldview.com and you click on from the menu project offerings educational courses menu, and then there's the list of these courses that we're in the process of developing, and you can see the one for the meta crisis. And so part one is framing the meta crisis. Part two are some common but simplistic responses to the meta crisis, to just be aware of that, which a lot of people in their daily life, maybe are already aware of some of these responses, which are, partial but true, true but partial. And that's one of the things that we needed to establish kind of early in the course here. And then using game theory and complexity thinking to understand the problem space and the potential solution space. So in fact, that's a lot of what some of your past guests have talked about. We're going to try to work on that in a way that is understandable and engaging to people. We might have different versions of this class based on, how advanced people are. Some people are maybe kind of just new to this, and we want to hit the basic, the most important notes on this in this course, regardless of the level. But some of them, maybe the most advanced ones, would involve that, really in-depth understanding of things like, the multipolar traps and the principal agent problem and the, attractors, So part 4 of this class is assessing the, in fact, this gets this connection to my presentations on past, webcasts, such as the Stoa, is the assessing the integrative and meta-modern approaches to addressing the meta crisis, covering these ideational approaches that I was describing briefly a few minutes ago, and this more specific approaches and implementations that are out there, with these organizations, these people doing these sort of things. And then part 5 would be to try to look at what would an optimal comprehensive solution look like? And we really be looking at, as you were saying, like a problem well understood is half solved. So we really would want to look at that. We want to look at what are the main fulcrum points, or what you can also think of as acupuncture points, that we would need to probably simultaneously address in order to get some traction. And to look at, we would need a multifaceted and multi-threaded solution that would involve different people working in different ways. But the comprehensive solution would need to, at the minimum, involve a few things such as fundamental political reform, environmental protection, regeneration, boots on the ground, implementation at the community level. And there's quite a few more of them. So that is kind of the idea. So we want to look at, a minimal solution, comprehensive solution, actionable, really solution would have to involve at least A, B, C, D.
Yeah, and then it looks like I've just got the course in front of me, and in part 6, what are some of the organizations doing these things, and what is their implementation? So the course seems really well baked. I'm excited to fund this once the grants round starts. That much to be clear. I'm doing a whole podcast episode with you, but I think that you're doing important work here of laying out from start to end the sort of problem space here, and that's exciting to me. The synthesis that has happened,
and it's an ongoing thing. So this is like partially an educational process and partially a research process. So there is that sophistication spectrum, there is that capability stack, and we're going to work with that. It might involve multiple cohorts for this course. It might be on different platforms. We're looking at some different organizations, some different social networks that are already focused on, in some way, understanding the greatest challenges of our time and addressing them. There's the so-called Emerge network. So you might have heard of Emerge, associated with Perspectiva. There's a New Republic of the Heart, associated with the late Terry Patton. And so there's some others out there, they're work through Mighty Networks, which is a social network platform that was kind of designed around being able to serve courses to the community members. So that's at least one angle we're looking at for delivering this course, or different versions of the course. It probably would need to be different versions because people are coming from different perspectives, different ideas, so there's only so much you could fit in a course, so we want to bring people, reach them where they are and be able to lift them up from there, to recognize this greater context and get them to recognize what they can do to address these challenges, because there are things we can do.
Yeah. Well, great. I can't wait for the course to be out. I guess, pinching and zooming back out to the Enlightened Worldview Project and sort of the whole of everything that you're doing here, what would you say the end game is? So what does the world look like if you're maximally successful with the Enlightened Worldview Project?
Oh, yeah. Well, I from this, I'm drawing from the work of Leonard Rachel Anderson and Hansi Freinacht. I've really... I agree with their kind of vision. Like if you would ask them, admittedly, they don't really necessarily agree with each other. I think Lena wouldn't like being mentioned exactly in the same sentence as Hansi. They have some differences of opinion, sometimes. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that people are directly interacting with each other, and they are getting their, there's a local focus, but there's also a community focus, a global focus. So there are these circles of understanding and concern, and people are having their human rights respected and their needs met for healthcare. And there's an education process that works throughout the entire lifespan. So you don't just stop learning at a certain age. You continue, and you have people who are still working on learning throughout, their even rather advanced age. Sometimes they're learning from quite younger people, and vice versa. And we have the natural environment. We are respecting that. We are living more sustainably. There are things that really just about drive me crazy when I look at places like Las Vegas, where it's just it's all for. It's only kind of just there to, forget about, life and have a good time.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's really damaging to the natural environment to be doing that sort of a thing. So we have all this energy. We have mental, emotional energy, and we have limited time, but we do have some time that we can invest, and we can invest it in things that are fulfilling and sustainable. And if we direct our attention toward these challenges, that we can find that we do find that fulfillment in life far more than going to Vegas or whatever. So that's kind of the hopefully that kind of answers the question of what does the world look like with this vision. I'm obviously very influenced by the Nordic meta-modern school. And it's partially because I'm Nordic. I'm a Nordic American, but it's also because I just happen to have been sold on that, And but it's an integrative approach. I think there's things that we can learn from schools of thought throughout the world, and from east, from west, from north, from south, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I think that. Just looking at the map of the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis and just knowing what's out there, I found myself frantically Googling who are these people and what's the TLDR of each of them and what they believe. So I didn't even know that was a thing before seeing your work, but I'm really excited that you've helped me place on a map how Web3 relates to all of these things and what has been influencing for you there. And I guess that's kind of a setup for my next question, which is, the listeners to this podcast are 7,000 social change makers, entrepreneurs, and Web3 thinkers. And so do you have any sort of advice, feedback, or comments for them about how they fit within the broader taxonomy of Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis, or things that they should check out, or just any comments directed towards the Web3 centric audience that maybe didn't know about all of this work in the until this episode?
Yeah, well, I think it's awesome, the Web3 crowd, because probably what we'll need to do in order to really address these challenges of our time is to actually create new political and economic frameworks that make the existing ones obsolete. Now, I don't really believe in hyper-localism, so it's going to probably involve a combination of localism and globalism in a sustainable kind of way, but probably we need so many of these, or we need to start with relatively local and manageably small social experiments. So that is what we're doing. But we also want to keep in mind there's a few important aspects of life that we want to maintain and protect, which are, we want to keep in mind, okay, so we are very much dependent, deeply dependent on the natural environment. We want to respect human rights, which I think human rights go by the wayside so much when we have lack of governance. So that essentially leads to perverse game theory dynamics, wherein people and organizations with the most resources can, some cases those get hijacked by sociopaths or sociopathic thinking among otherwise decent people, but to maximize their resources without regard to human rights. So we're seeing this a lot with these major corporations, and so we need to change the way we're doing things at a pretty fundamental level. And these decentralized Web3 social experiments are going to get us there.
Amazing. Last question before we wrap, and is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say?
Oh, well, gosh, I suppose I'm looking, if anybody wants to co-create on anything that I'm talking about here, you can send me an email, brandon@enlightenedworldview.com. And there's a lot of ideas that I've thrown out here that may be adjacent to other people's ideas. And I'm interested in, getting involved with other stuff. There's a possibility that what I have so far with Enlightened Worldview could work under the umbrella of an existing organization. So I don't have an organizational framework, like a 501c3 or a public benefit corporation or any of that yet. But if there's anything out there that could serve as like maybe fiscal sponsor or investment or other possibilities of partnerships, I'm definitely willing to explore that. I might even be willing to, kind of allow for the intellectual property that I've been creating so far with my team members to be under the umbrella of another organization out there, in order to allow this stuff to actually see the light of day, so to speak, and actually do something.
Great. So if anyone is out there and is interested in collaborating with you on that, they can email you. And for the rest of the audience, check out enlightenedworldview.com, which is the Enlightened Worldview Project. And then check out the Gitcoin grant, which we will link in the show notes. And then is there anything else that you want to direct people to learn more?
Oh, yeah, just that, enlightenedworldview.com and my email, and we'll talk later.
And also, I got to say, check out the Memetic Tribes of the Meta Crisis talk you gave at the Stoa, because I think that it's really cool.
Thank you very much.
All right, Brandon. Well, thanks so much for coming on the GreenPilled Pod. Keep up the great work.
Awesome.